Hello, my friends. It is day 124, and we're reading First Chronicles chapter 13 through First Chronicles chapter 16. But before we get into today's recap, I want to thank you for taking a moment to check out this video, and hopefully you're finding the yearly Bible reading program very helpful and very advantageous. Finding it a great blessing as you continue to walk along this journey with Christ. If you have not yet accepted the invitation to be a part of the reading community, please check out the description box below. And there you will find a link that will take you directly to the YouVersion Bible app, where you can join a community of readers who are reading the Bible every single day and leaving feedback on the things they're learning through the calendar reading. And so today we're back in the book of First Chronicles. We have been jumping all around. We have quite an interesting week ahead of us where we'll be exploring things in the book of Psalms and going back to 2 Samuel chapter 6. And it's going to seem like we're reading the same story, but just remember, we're reading it from two different perspectives. And if you can recall, the book of First Chronicles is painting this lovely picture of David's life, really intending to increase and really depict David in the greatest light. If you look in 2 Samuel, you're going to see that it's a little more careful to include details to things that have happened. And so you may not always get the most positive perspective of David, even though he is greatly celebrated. They're going to be very sure to help us understand just exactly what happened. And so there's going to be a bit of difference. There's going to be a bit more detail. And I think it's going to be a great blessing to have both stories read together. So today we're reading about David's attempt to move the Ark of the Covenant to the city of David, which is Jerusalem. And we're going to read about this again in the next couple of days when we read it in 2 Samuel. And I want you to really, really pay attention to what's happening, because by reading both passages or both accounts, you'll see what's going on. And there's a significant reason for why we see things unfold. Now, in chapter 13, we see that there was an individual by the name of Uzzah who was participating in the transport of the Ark of the Covenant. And of course, the oxen stumbled. He reaches out to grab it, and then the Lord strikes him down for touching the Ark of the Covenant, which the Ark of the Covenant was one of the most sacred and most holy, most separated or sanctified article in the temple. So it could not be handled any kind of way, which is why the Levites were carrying it on poles, right? They were not able to touch it. So to do this was obviously punishable unto death. And this is what happened. Now, David's response is interesting, because in verse 11 and verse 12, it says David was angry in verse 11. And then in verse 12, he was afraid. So two emotional responses there to the death, which you could understand, right? Because here he is trying to transport the Ark of the Covenant, make it give it a permanent home. It seems as though one of the servants does something innocent, right? Because who would not try to catch something as sacred as the Ark of the Covenant from falling? But the thing is, there's a law out there, right? And this is one of the reasons why we could probably celebrate why we should be thankful that we're in grace rather than being under the law, because the law typically does not take into consideration one's intention. If one sins, they're punished. They're punishable. And this was one of those moments where David got to really see that it's not so much your intention here when it comes to these sorts of things. You have to abide by the law, because this is a sacred moment. This is a sacred article, and defamation cannot be tolerated. And so very harsh, not harsh, but hard, I meant a very hard lesson to learn. And David obviously learns that. So therefore, he takes a very careful precautions moving forward. And he finally is able to get the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. And then we find in chapter 16 that he gives one of the greatest songs of praise that we've seen in the Old Testament. Now, one of the things I think is very important is to notice how David is reverencing this moment. He's taking this very seriously. I actually highlighted several instances where in chapter 14, or a couple, should I say, where David is so sensitive to the voice of God, the presence of God, which is why this ark is another big deal for him, that he's always trying to figure out what should he do as a response to what God is telling him to do. So, for instance, in chapter 14, he's at this situation where he's going to fight against the Philistines, and he's always asking the Lord, like in verse 10, should I go out to fight them? Or in verse 13 or 14, asking God, what shall I do in response to the Philistines? This will become a behavior that is characteristic of David, which is why we can understand his desire, his commitment to bringing this Ark of the Covenant to the city of Jerusalem, his desire to have God involved in his life and present in the things that he's doing day to day. David seemingly had one of the greatest relationships, maybe I should say one of the greatest intimate relationships with God than anyone that I may reflect upon in the Old Testament. Of course, David had a relationship. Moses had a relationship where he can see God face to face. When you start thinking about David and the way he's moving, the way he's acknowledging God in every single thing, the way he is inviting God into his life, you just don't see that too often in the Old Testament. And to be honest, you don't see it a lot in the New Testament either. But it is inspiring. It gives us something to aspire towards as we think about our relationship with God. Now, going back to the song that David wrote, and one of the things that stands out to me about David is the way he talks about God. He makes me almost godly jealous whenever I read about what he's saying. When I read about how he feels about God, his desire and his dependency on God, his understanding of how God operates. This, I said it in one of the other conversations we had. This is not just poetry. This is a lived experience being expressed with gratitude and with thankfulness. David has seen something that has changed his life, and what we're reading through these songs are testaments to that fact. So I'm enjoying this. I'm actually seeing David in ways I have never seen him before, and it's a pretty glorious, a pretty great experience. So I want to encourage you to continue to read. We have so much more to go, and I believe the best is yet to come, as always. So let's keep reading. Let me know what you think about this day of reading, and I want to know what you think was the reason why Uzzah, was killed for touching the Ark of the Covenant, trying to keep it from falling. I want you to, obviously we have there in the text, but I want you to think about it, do some research to see what you can come up with. And if you find it, leave it in the comment box below, and let's see how far we can get. I look forward to hearing your response, and it should be a nice challenge to discover what was going on here that made this act of unintentionally, but maybe should I say not, that's not the word, of innocently, that's the word. What was it about this act, this innocent act that Uzzah did that led to his death? What was it about it that offended God so much? And let's do some research. Leave a comment in the comment box below. Again, thank you for watching. Until next time, take care. God bless. And remember, live by the word.